You're listening to Being Autistic. I'm your host, Shelly, and I am a 50-year-old woman sharing my experiences about what it's like to grow up knowing I was different but not knowing why, how I learned I was on the autism spectrum, and what it's like to be autistic. Hello and welcome to episode number 10. This episode is called The Process of Getting Diagnosed. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about how I found out that I was autistic. And if you're new to this podcast, I found out that I was autistic when I was almost 50 years old. I was like 2 weeks away from turning 50. So how did I go through the process of finding that out and getting diagnosed? I'm going to talk about that today. So I had no clue at all during my entire life that I could have been autistic. That was never a thought in my mind. I had heard about, like how autistic people acted and things like that. But I always thought that they were like really hyperactive and had learning disabilities, and it was obvious. Like I thought that you could tell just by looking at somebody or just by, trying to talk to them and just being completely obvious that they were not neurotypical. And I never thought that I could have been in this category. So when I was 49, I saw, this is how I first realized that I could be autistic. I saw a Facebook meme of all things. I mean, you always think of Facebook as being like meaningless and a waste of time, but honestly, if it hadn't been for me scrolling on Facebook, I would have never probably found out that I was autistic. So I saw this meme that it wasn't really a funny meme, it was more like educational. So it talked about the different ways that a female can portray autism. So it's not really the same as a male. And this is a big issue when it comes to why females don't get diagnosed as much, because it's different, it appears different, there are different traits, and females also are better at masking, they're better at pretending that they're normal, and also a lot of the things that make autistic women autistic can be seen as normal for girls. So there's a lot of reasons. Like, I'm not really the expert on all of the reasons, and I'm just here to kind of generalize it, give you an overview of why that is. So, and also a lot of women get misdiagnosed too, because they get overlooked because they're not boys, and it's usually boys that get diagnosed with autism. At least it used to be that way, and it's not that way anymore, thankfully. So now more and more women and young girls are getting diagnosed, rightfully so. And so, like I said, a lot of women in the past used to get misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder. That was a common one. So that's just something to think about if you are not yet diagnosed and you feel like, why have you not noticed? Why have you been overlooked? It's very common, and it's becoming more and more a thing now that older women are getting diagnosed. I am by far not the only one, and there's a lot of them that are older than me. I've even heard of women in their 70s that are getting diagnosed. So, this meme that I saw on Facebook, it told me all of the things that females, well, not all, but a lot of the major things that females look like when they have autism. And I thought, wow, I have every single one of those traits. And I don't remember now which meme it was, or even what any of the traits were. All I knew was that it sounded like me, and it opened my eyes, because at first I'm like, I thought autism was something completely different. I did not know that it was these things. So what I did was of course, as any typical autistic person, I went to Google and I spent, I don't know how many days, hours, weeks researching this. And I found the assessments There's so many assessments online. If you're still not diagnosed and you're curious, then check out the assessments. I will leave a link to a couple of them in the show notes. The biggest one is the RAADS-R, I think it's called, RAADS-R. That was one of the first ones that I took, and what I did was I printed off my results because the results showed that I have a lot of autistic traits. So I printed that off, and I actually took a couple different assessments. It wasn't just the one. It was a lot of them. I probably took 5 or 6, maybe 7 before I even went to my therapist with these results. So I had already been in therapy because autistic people tend to have anxiety and depression and problems with work, problems with relationships, problems with life, just problems fitting in. And so I had been in therapy for a couple years, trying to figure out why I struggled so much with all of these things. And so I was already seeing a therapist, and I went to her with my assessment results, and I said, "Have you ever heard of this autism test?" And I showed her the page, and she's like, "No, I have not." And so she didn't really know too much about autism either. And this is something I wanted to talk about as well, because this is another reason why a lot of people, especially women, are not getting diagnosed, or at least they haven't been before, because a lot of therapists are not really aware of how different autism looks in certain people. It's not the same for everybody, and so it's hard to recognize. And like I said, it gets misdiagnosed a lot as bipolar disorder, or what's the personality one? There's another personality. There's something that stands with BPD is the initials of it, but it's not bipolar disorder. It's something else, and I'm blanking on what it is. But that's another one that often gets misdiagnosed. But so these therapists don't know. Most parents don't know what to look for in their kids. They just think, "Oh, my kid struggles with these things." It's just what nobody really thinks much of it. And so thankfully these memes are going around on Facebook, and I'm trying to share them too, like the ones that share the information of how people can be different with autism. Not everybody is the same. So that's really what the whole thing is very easy to hide it. But the autistic person does not feel like it's hidden easily. They feel like, why am I I mean, they always know they're different. That's kind of like a common theme. I've always known it too. And it's like, why does nobody else see it? But, sometimes people do see it, but they just don't know that it's autism. So anyway, I went to my therapist with these results of the test, and she said, "Okay, we can refer you to get tested." And that's when I learned that it's typical for people to be on a wait list for a very long time, because the demand is much higher than the number of people that can do the assessments. So you have to go to it's not just any old therapist. It's got to be either a psychiatrist or a psychologist or some sort of neurologist, and they have to be familiar with autism and how it presents differently in different people. And a lot of them out there are still not up on the way that they, what they should be doing, because I hear so many people that go to get diagnosed and they don't get the diagnosis because that particular person either has some personal belief that females don't have it or adults don't have it, or that you can't be autistic because you can do eye contact, or you can't be autistic because you're a very sociable. But there's so many nuances to that, and there's so many reasons why different people can be better at different things. So the thing is, when you get tested, they take into account so many things, and what you have to do is have the traits that had been present from the time that you were a child, like age 3 at least, and they have to be present currently as well, and they have to be things that cause you problems in your life. So a lot of people say, a lot of neurotypical people will say this, that, oh, I have this trait too, but that doesn't mean I'm autistic, so maybe you just have that trait, but maybe you're not autistic. But the thing is, if you have a lot of the traits, like more than half, and if you've had them since you were a child, and if they cause you problems in your life, that's a whole different thing. It's kind of like this, like every trait of autism can be in a neurotypical person. It can, but the thing is, it's not going to be an everyday thing, and it's going to be easy for them to get over it, you know. So one example would be light sensitivity. A lot of autistic people are sensitive to bright lights, like fluorescent lights, and so you might have a neurotypical person and an autistic person both say, bright lights bother me, I can't handle bright lights. But yet that neurotypical person will still be able to handle it in a much better capacity, and it will not be an issue for them all the time, and it won't be an issue for them throughout their entire life. Whereas the autistic person, you can't just fake that it's okay. It will give you headaches, it will cause you to squint. I've had moments at some of my jobs underneath bright fluorescent lights where I literally had to close my eyes, and I had to work with my eyes shut, because suddenly it was overwhelming, and I could not open my eyes. And also, neurotypical people, they don't really think of these things until somebody else brings it up to them. So this is a good way to know if you're autistic, if you struggle with these things without knowing that it could be autism. So it's not like you're biased in that way. You're not looking for these issues. They just happen. And neurotypical people will say, you know, well, I have that happen too. One time this happened to me, so I might be autistic too. But really, if it just happened once, if it was something that they had to, like, you know, think hard about if it really bothered them or not, and it didn't cause them any problems in their life, then it was probably not autism. So that's the difference. The difference is that all of these traits are with us for life, and they make our lives hell. So that is the criteria for getting diagnosed, is you have to have these traits, most of them anyway. That you don't need to have all of them, but most of them need to be present from your childhood, and they need to cause problems in your life. And so that means, like I just said, you know, they have to affect you in a negative way. And like, I don't think they're really going to give somebody the diagnosis if they say, well, you know, I'm not good with talking with people, but they can and they do, and it's not a problem for them, and they don't have any other traits. So that's what it is. It's really just, and this is why they need to have somebody that can assess you, that knows what they're looking for. So this test is, now I'm going to go into how the diagnostic process went. I was given many tests. So there was one where I went through a piece of paper, and, you know, I had to answer questions like, do you do this sometimes, never, or all the time? Things like that. Then there was a computer test where I had to answer a bunch of questions. You know, these are all kind of fun, actually, and I actually did enjoy this process of answering all these questions. I don't know why, but like, some people might not be that way. Some people might feel like it's mentally draining to answer all of these questions, because the process takes a couple of hours. I think it took me 2 hours, maybe a little more, but you know, that was because I was only tested for autism and not ADHD. A lot of people will test for both because they are common together, but I did not get tested for that. Doesn't mean that I don't have it, but that's another story. I didn't want to go on medications, so he didn't do the test, but most people do get tested for both. And so your appointment might be maybe 3 or 4 hours long instead of 2, and just more tests. So another one of the tests that they did for me was giving me a book that was like a children's book, and I had to narrate this book. So I went through it. It was just pictures. There was no words. And I had to explain what was happening in the story. And I mean, I can't really explain to you how my assessment of that book made it so that I was autistic, but like the person will watch you and, you know, pick up on the things that you're noticing in the book. That's if you have that test. Not everybody does, but I heard that it was a pretty common test. And then there was another one where I had to pretend that I was brushing my teeth, and he set up a little table and said, pretend that this is your toothbrush and this is your water, and go through all the steps that you take to brush your teeth. And so I just, you know, simple, here's what I do. I do this, told him all the things I did. And I still don't know what made him realize that I was autistic from that test, but it was just one of the tests. So just be prepared if you do go for a diagnostic assessment that they're going to give you some of these. They're kind of fun, I guess. I mean, they're not hard. None of these tests, you know, a lot of people get really nervous and stressed out about these, and they really don't need to, because all it is you just answering questions about your life and performing these, not even performing, you know, just here's a book, narrate it. You know, it took 3 minutes. So, you know, a lot of people make it sound like these tests are just horrendous, and I guess I didn't have that experience, and I don't think that they're as bad as people, you know, think they're gonna be. Because really, when it comes down to it, it's all for the purpose of getting diagnosed, hopefully. So it's all for good. And so I had that appointment that was like split up into 3 different appointments. The first one was just another interview type appointment where he just asked me questions and got to know me and got to know my, you know, my views on life and how I grew up and my views on how I was treated and all of the things that made me think that I was autistic. So another thing is that it is very helpful if you have done your research already and maybe go in there with a list of things that you notice about yourself. So that way when you know, he's interviewing you, that's a bad word, he's asking questions, then you can just make sure that he knows everything. He or she, sorry, I don't mean to be sexist here, but it's just that I had a guy. My guy was male. So I wanted to have that information all there handy so that I didn't forget anything, because you don't want to get out of the assessment and be like, oh, I completely forgot to tell him that I have this problem, you know. So you really want to do your research and at least write down a list or print off a list or something. That way it's easier for you to make sure that he or she has all of the correct information that they need. And so that first interview or that first assessment was maybe an hour long, and it was just talking. Then the second one was the actual tests. And then, you know, these are spread out by a week or 2. At least they were for me. And I hear this is common. You know, the 3 appointments are spread out by a week or 2. And then 2 weeks after the second one was the actual results. And then he went through my, the paper, you know, they type up their notes. So he just printed off the notes, and there it was, everything that he thought and everything that I said, and then he kind of said stuff like, a normal person would score under this score, and this person scored this score. So it kind of gives you scores, like, so you can tell, you know, if you're heavily autistic or, you know, in that area of each area. So that was basically it. It was 3 appointments spaced apart by a couple weeks. And when I was done, it was reassuring, and it was very, validating, because I I figured it was true, and I just needed that, validation from a professional. And so now I do kind of want to talk about a few other things. You may not be able, you may not have good luck at all with, trying to get assessed. A lot of people, like I said, the waiting list is really long, but I got lucky because somehow somebody canceled and I was able to get scheduled in, because apparently they don't just go and get the next person on the list. If you're already scheduled for an appointment, they don't change it. So if you maybe try to keep calling and seeing if there's any openings, that's how I got in. So I really only had to wait about 2 months before I got my assessment. And so after that, yeah, I felt really good about it because it validated my entire life. I felt like it was like answering all of my questions about why I was different, and it was good. So the only thing is, it's not completely 100% good all the time. Like, you're gonna go through a lot of emotions afterwards, and I kind of liken it to grief in a way, because after you find out that you are autistic, yes, you are validated and you feel really good about that, but then you're like, okay, my entire childhood was not really ruined, but it could have been different. And then you start to think, oh, how would my life have been different if I had known? And that's, a personal choice of what you want to think, if you want to believe. Would my life have been better? Would it have been worse? There's really nothing you can do about it anyway at this point. All you can do is go forward with the information that you have. So I went through a phase where I'm like, was this a good thing or a bad thing that I found out this late in life? And I really don't have an answer, because that's different for everybody. Like I said, you can be one of those people that looks at it like, well, the past is the past. There's nothing I can do about it now. I might as well improve my life as much as I can right now. But you can also look at it as, I could have had support. I could have had explanations for how I am the way I am. A lot of things could have been better, but I think also, too, a lot of things could have been worse, because if you're diagnosed as a child, you go through life with that label, and that might affect things negatively. So there's two sides of it, What you just gotta try to be optimistic about however it worked out for you. And then aside from, going back and thinking about your past, you also might go through depression about it, because now that you're diagnosed, you almost feel trapped a little bit. You almost feel like, okay, now I have to deal with this thing that I can't get rid of. And that was a source of depression for me for a little bit. And I'm not even 100% sure that I'm past that stage. I do struggle with depression a lot, and it's hard to say what of my depression is from being autistic and what is from still going through the phases of integrating it into my life. So it's like, it's a struggle to try to figure out how to go about your life now that you know what's wrong. I mean, it isn't even something that's wrong, because autism is a neurotype. That's what it is. It is not a brain malfunction or deformity. It is a different type of operating system, basically. So after you get the diagnosis, you're like, okay, so this is the type of brain that I have, and how can I best make my life work, knowing that I can't change the way that my brain thinks. And that's been probably my biggest struggle, is realizing that I can't change the way that my brain works. I mean, yes, there are things that you can do to try to improve your mindset. And, there's journaling, there's meditation, there's yoga, there's spending time in nature, there's eating healthy, there's all sorts of things that you can do to make yourself, be able to handle life better. But then, I still go through phases where I'm like, I can't get rid of this. No matter how much I meditate, at the end of the day, I still don't fit in with people. Or I still can't handle loud noises. So, I'm still learning, and I'm still dealing with the whole thing with, like, I'm such a big proponent of holistic wellness and health. And I try to live my life as natural as possible, but I'm learning that I cannot do a lot of the things that I wish I could do with those practices because of my brain. So, like, one of the things that I always heard about that was good to help with stress and depression and anxiety was to think positively and to repeat affirmations and change your mindset. But honestly, that's the biggest struggle, and I think for autistic people that's a common struggle, because we have a lot of traits that keep us from being able to do that. We have something called black and white thinking, where things are either good or they're bad. There's no in between. We also have negativity bias, where we will automatically go to the most negative outcome. And there's a reason for that. Our brains are set up to try to prevent us from dying or suffering. Especially autistic people have problems suffering because lots of things make us suffer. Lots of things in the world make us suffer. And so we're always trying to avoid suffering. And that means that we're always trying to get our brains to keep us from suffering more. I feel like I'm kind of talking in circles here, and I hope this is making sense. But basically, it's very hard for autistic people to think positive because, honestly, we're all about facts. And the fact is that our brains struggle with the world. It's just a fact. And so we are going to have to work harder. In order to do the things that other people do, we have to overcome a lot more obstacles. We have to struggle more. And sometimes we never get there. There's a lot of autistic people that never ever find a fulfilling relationship. They never find close friends. They never find a job that works for them. And a lot of people have different levels of how much they struggle. So it's very different. And that's a very important thing to remember about autism is everybody's different. So one person can struggle with this thing and another person can struggle with that thing, and they'll both be able to achieve different goals. And some people will have worse outcomes than others, but basically we all struggle. And I almost feel now like I'm kind of taking this episode into a deeper direction that I didn't really, I don't really script my podcast episodes. I really just wanted to talk about the process of, the diagnostic process. And I guess now I'm kind of processing myself the outcome of that. And that's important to know, what to expect after you get diagnosed. It's a very important part in your life, and it requires a lot of processing, which is the whole reason why I started this podcast in the first place, because I'm really big on processing myself and learning about myself. And I feel like writing takes too long. I'm really big into journaling, and I love writing. I'm way more than I love talking. But the thing was, I feel like writing is a little bit tedious and it hurts my hand. So, this is a lot of talking, so I would rather talk than write all of this. And I also am trying to help people. So this is another reason why I started this podcast, was so that I could help others on this journey. And I really hope that I am doing that. So I hope this episode was helpful for you. If you have not yet been diagnosed and you are curious what the process is like, I hope this helped. And for those of you that have already been diagnosed, then I will say to you that keep on processing everything. Maybe start your own podcast. Maybe start a blog. Maybe start a YouTube channel. Get it out. You have to process the whole thing. It's a lot because, you're really going back throughout your whole life like I've been doing. And I'm just thinking, okay, this part of my life was like this because of autism. This part of my life here was like this for that reason. It's a lot of processing. And that's all part of the diagnostic process, is expressing your feelings, how it makes you feel afterwards. It's kind of a lifelong thing. Like, once you process the actual diagnosis, then you're going to be processing the rest of your life. Like, okay, now what? Going forward, how is this going to help me? That's basically it. So now I've been talking for half an hour and I'm going to stop. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this episode was helpful for you. I'll see you in the next episode.